Being together is pure sweet honey. Being together is pure sweet honey.
What's next? Whew, made it. Stephen Gates. So, thank you. Stephen Gates has been a designer for a long time. In fact, anybody in here been a designer since you were, say, 5 years old? I asked this question, can't see a darn thing. Oh, there are some 5-year-olds. I mean, 5-year-olds, I'm sorry. You know what I meant. Well, Gates actually started when he was 2. He started learning letterpress with his dad, so clearly design is in his DNA. You know what? He's been doing this for over 20 years now. He's worked on some incredible Fortune 500 brands and all of that stuff. But lately, just recently, he decided to exit the in-house world and start his own agency. Crazy. That's the name of the agency, not just Gates. But he just actually decided to join us from a world tour. He was on with a small band that would not be playing in Nashville, I guess. Metallica, I think y'all might have heard of it. So he came out of the gate pretty strong with some big name clients. But yesterday we had a lovely event called How Women Lead. We were all having a great time. Meantime, this is what Gates was doing. Can y'all read that? There you go. I don't know. It's a tractor. They do these things in Nashville. I don't know if he did it, but he did send me the picture, so I thought I'd share. Anyway, Gates is an incredible human. He's a dear friend, and I would like to welcome him once again to the How Design Live stage. I don't know where he's coming from. So please welcome Stephen Gates. I know. You're welcome.
Yeah, Amy didn't realize that was a programming suggestion that I thought maybe we could do a little bit better on what we were doing. I've known Amy for so long and I love her so much, and I gotta say, I pulled up to the property with my wife on Saturday and I thought 2 things. The first one was the MVP of Westworld is going great. I'm like the rest of you. I left at my room at 6 a.m. to be here on time. And the other, seriously, my smartwatch thinks it's stolen. I've been remote for 6 years, and it's welcome, new owner. I'm like, asshole. But look, the other thing, and I love Amy so much, and I was like, this is so fantastic because after all the years of How, after all the venues in all the cities, we're finally someplace where her hair found its people. It was actually kind of sweet walking over here this morning. I watched this young couple stop and ask to take a picture with her, and they're like, we love Dollywood. But look, we don't feel bad because right after that, they stopped me and they're like, we love the Drew Carey show. Can we take a photo? And I am never texting her photos again. To everybody doing? So as my intro said, my name is Steve Gates. I can never match the intros that Amy does ever. But like she said, so I've worked at in-house, I've worked at agencies, I've worked at all sorts of different places. A year ago, I started my own studio called Crazy. For everybody who wrote to me and said, what took you so long publicly? You were right, I'm sorry, right? But so anyway, I have my own studio, so I get to work with, and it is so great to finally say this after 20 years, I have clients that I fucking love to work with. Right? They are cool, they're amazing, they're supportive, they're respectful, they actually listen to me. It's actually possible. All those things are possible. Somebody made a joke to me the other day. They're like, I'm not worried about AI because for AI to work, a client has to actually be able to express what they want. We'll get into all of this and much more over the next 30 minutes. For the last 7 years, I've had a podcast called The Crazy One, which is really dedicated to the fact that, for me, showing up as your authentic self, working as a creative, you have to be a little bit wrong in the head. But I'm also the show is actually coming back. It's been on a touch of a hiatus. Tomorrow at 6, I'm doing a live version of the podcast, which is an AMA. So any questions you want, anything you've always been wondering, anything you love the talk, you hate the talk, whatever it is, feel free to show up and let me know. And before you ask, this is not my first rodeo, people. I've been here before, but this also is gonna out all of your friends who show up late, right? Because this happened last year. They showed up and they're like, oh, what was that font you were using? I'm like, you weren't there for the beginning of my talk. But I know how it goes. So this is the font. So if you ask, now everybody knows. Like I said, I know this crowd. But we want to talk today about how do you have a breakthrough career. The word career has gotten real interesting over the last year or two, right? I think we've seen with the pandemic the change of what does a career mean when you're remote. We've seen with layoffs the instability that can come with that. And I just want to start with a real simple question. And so what's going to happen is, here in a minute I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, because the question I'm going to ask you is incredibly susceptible to peer pressure, especially if you're here with your boss. This question might get a little weird. But so, I know it's early, but here's what I want everybody to do. Close your eyes for just a second. And I'm on stage, so I can see who's not closing your eyes, right? But here's what I want you to think about. And it's a simple question. Do you love your job? Do you love your job like you wake up every single morning grateful that you're able to do the work you're able to do? Do you love your job happy and thrilled to be a part of what you be able to do? If you can honestly say yes to that, put your hand in the air. That's about what I thought it would be. Everybody put your hands down. So, okay, we don't want to out anybody. So if your boss is next to you, you need to put your hand up. It's okay. Right? But loving your job, right, is work. It's hard. It's even a new concept. Like if you went to my grandfather and said, do you love your job? He was a carpenter. That wasn't in the cards. Because basically, I think there are three types of jobs, right? There are jobs you love. And I've had jobs that I truly love. Like whenever I worked at Starwood Hotels, that was a job I loved. And the problem is once you've had one of those, it screws up the rest of your career, right? Because you chase that CEO, you chase that job, you chase that team, you want to be a part of that again, and it's like, why don't I love it? I think there are jobs that you do, right? I can show up, I do it, it's good, it's not trying to actively kill me, but it's okay. Honestly, these talks turn into therapy super quick, right? And circle of trust, right? We're all in this together, right? But I think that there are jobs that you do. And I think that the problem is, so every single week I mentor young designers. Every single week I'm talking to different people. And the problem is, I think for too many of us, what we're actually working on is just trying to keep our job. Because I think it's not one of those things where we're doing it, it's just how do I survive this? How do I sort of get through the end of the day? That's the crazy thing for me, if I'm being totally honest about, since I founded my own studio. For the first time in a decade, I wake up excited about the work I get to do, as opposed to for too long I woke up trying to figure out how I was going to survive the day. What were the meetings I could skip? What were the things that I could do? Why was it that I had become more of a politician than a designer? Why was it I'd become more of a therapist than a strategist, right? And so for me, it was crazy for me to be able to go through that, and how far I'd gone into the trying to keep my job, and how far I'd gotten away from loving my job. And it's such an interesting thing, because this is another fact that I find fascinating. While in many cases, a lot of people will tell you that the Great Recession is dying off, that it's slowing down, that there are things like that, the facts don't prove that out. 3.8 million people in April said, you know what, in the face of an uncertain economy, in the face of what's going on, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore. I have friends who are quitting to nothing than rather to keep working at the corporations that they're at, because they're like, look, I just can't keep doing this. Right? We're in the midst of an insane mental health crisis in this industry. We're in the midst of, a hiring practice that I think is inhuman at best in most cases. Right? That is a fire hose of silence and rejection, and going through this where you question every single decision that you've ever made. I decided to very publicly go through this process on LinkedIn, right? Because my ego was like, we're gonna put it on LinkedIn because we're gonna have a job in 2 months. Whoops. That was fun to be like, hey, Dad, sorry, it didn't work out. Talked to a bunch of people, didn't go anywhere. But this is the thing, right? We're in a place where there's this incredible tug of war between how do I get to a purpose-driven job? How do I get to something I love? How do I even reconcile and give myself permission to be happy? And here's the thing, right? We don't have a lot of role models for what does it look like to love your job? What does it look like to be a designer who can create something, to take a risk, to be able to do something, to be able to have a big influence on society? I want to highlight one of those people today. There's a bug up. How is there a bug in this freaking place? What the hell? The Jurassic Park starter kit my room looks awful into, but anyway. Does anybody know who this is? Okay, we'll go one step further. I'll give you his name. Does anybody know who this designer is? Designed one of the most influential pieces of probably design in the last 10 years. Has had a massive impact on society. If you go down to Broadway in Nashville, you can see his work everywhere. Okay, so Shigetaka designed this. Unsung design hero. Unsung. Everybody's like, he has really lost it this year. But wait, just go with me on this, right? Because this is somebody who loves their job, and he has all the pieces of a breakthrough career, right? Because this is somebody that actually went through and looked at the emoji system and said, you know what this is missing? That was the first part of it, right? And we've all been there. We've all had that moment where you're like, ooh, we should do this. The problem is 99.5% of us are like, that is insane. That will kill my career. We could never do that. And this is why he's my hero, right? Because not only did he look at the system and go, you know what it's missing? Poop, which we can get into that, and that's a different talk, right? But then also, the reason why he's my hero is he looked at that, he designed it, and then sold it. Right? Like, that's the part that's impressive. Can you imagine that meeting, walking, like, guys, I've got an idea. Right? Like, there's a thing, okay, I think I know what we're missing. Right? There's this thing that, just go with me, hold on, wait, just go with me. And then got them to the point where an entire room full of, like, people and executives like, you know what, you're right. That's my freaking hero, right? Like, that, like, tell me, like, teach me, Obi-Wan, like, how did you do that? But this is the thing, right? Like, there's not a lot of people you're like, wow, that's somebody that, like, clearly is having a breakthrough career, is clearly doing it really well. But the other problem with this, whenever you talk about a breakthrough career, is that if you try to copy what he did, what anybody else is going to be on this stage, what I do, it doesn't work because you're somebody different, right? And I think that's the sort of part of it. So what do we have to do? And so there's, honestly, I want to talk about two traps because, like I said, every single week I talk to designers. Every single week I'm hearing about their imposter syndrome, what they're struggling with, how they're trying to grow their career, how they're doing these things. And there's two common things that we sort of need to wrap our head around. The first one is that there is not a right way to do this industry. Please stop thinking that, like, oh, I need to do it this way. And if you're a hiring manager, stop being so freaking arrogant as thinking, like, if you didn't go to this school or have this sort of, like, education, you can't be a good designer, right? Because this does more damage, and for the love of God, if you write job descriptions, please take the time to actually think about what you are writing. Like, again, I saw one the other day. It was like, must have 8 years experience in Figma. I love you all because you got that joke without me having to explain it. Like, there's a couple that I know are on the edge. So just so you know, Figma's been around for 4 years. So basically, you wrote a job description that requires a time machine, right? And it's like, and you don't understand what the problem is and why you aren't finding better talent, right? But here's the thing, is like for a lot of different places, some people are like, oh, you have to do this to be successful, right? Like you have to do this, and then do this, and then do this, and I have to do it in this order, and every single person in the world is like, I'm not doing it right, right? Because again, we continue to have this problem, and this is where social media is so dangerous for creatives, because what happens is we are comparing our insides to everybody else's outsides, and it is a comparison you will never win. Right? Because everybody, it's like shiny, everybody here, day one, like, oh, this is fantastic. My team is well funded. We're all incredibly happy. The people I work with are fantastic. They're amazing, right? Like our budgets and coffers are overflowing. None of that's true. None of it's true. But we're all going to say it, and everybody else is going to be like, ugh, I don't feel good. But again, some people, and this is actually a career path that they teach at a university, right? Like, yeah, it's a mystery why people come out screwed up. Because I'm like, sure. Right? Like, and am I the only one where like this spot is driving you crazy where it's slightly out of focus? Anyway. But here's the thing, right? Like, stop thinking there's a right way to do it. There's not, right? Like, there's not a way where you're going to go through this and be like, I'm doing it right. Because this is the problem. We're all different. Like, this is the thing I tell people all the time. Nobody would tell you what I've done in my career was a good idea. Right? If you're like, oh, like, you know, start at an agency and then go in-house and work across like all sorts of different directions and start your own thing. And like recruiters look at me and they're like, you're just a mess. Right? But like, doing okay. Kind of feel like maybe I'm killing it a little bit right now, but like, so it's kind of worked out. But that's the thing. Nobody would ever look at what I've done in my career and be like, yeah, do that. No, because there's not a right way to be able to do it. But somehow we all feel like we're like not measuring up. But this is the thing, right? It's like for all of us, our careers look different. Our skills are different. What you are good at is different. And again, this is why I started my podcast. This is why I have Here's the Crazy Ones tattooed on my right arm, is because the thing is that for all of us, what makes you different is your superpower. But that's the thing. We live in a society where we are led to believe that it actually is our weakness. And a lot of us also fall into this trap of like, well, I'm not happy all the time whenever I'm doing my work. And this is something I've spent a lot of time working through, right? Because I'm like, I'm not happy all the time. Why am I not happy? Like, why does this feel like work? I'm just doing my job, trying to keep my job. I'm trying to do this sort of thing. And the thing that I've discovered is that happiness is a really bad thing to have. Sounds weird, I know, but once again, stick with me for a second. So the reason why I say that is because happiness is a target, which means if I achieve this goal, if I do this thing, then I will be happy. If I win this award, if I come to this event, if I do whatever it is, then I will be happy. The problem is that whenever you get that, you accomplish that, you hit that goal, your brain is like, yay, we're happy. And then in about somewhere between 15 minutes to 2 days, it depends on how OCD and driven you are. Like for me, it's like the best ever was like 24 hours. And then your brain recalibrates and it's like, ooh, new target. We're not happy anymore. You need to go do that to be happy. Right? So it's this constant kind of peaks and valleys of as you go through your career trying to figure out, why do I not feel more fulfilled? Why am I not doing better at what this is? And I think a lot of what it is starting to understanding how do you, again, love what you do? How do you have joy in what you do every day? That's the key to a breakthrough career. Whenever you show up and you're able to do these things, but these are the traps that so many of us feel like I'm not doing my career right. I'm not happy all the time. Everybody else on social media looks like they are blissfully happy all the time. They post every day. They do all this sort of stuff, right? Like, these are incredibly destructive concepts. And I think for me, I just want to kind of quickly touch on them because, like, for me, if you want to have a really great career, you need to put yourself in a position where you get 3 things. The first one is peace with yourself. And this is one of the hardest things because I will continue to say that showing up as your authentic self at a job, showing up as who you really are and like what you need to be successful is one of the most rebellious acts that there is because it is truly something where it's like, okay, that is incredibly hard because there's so much peer pressure to show up as like the ideal employee and all this other stuff. But making peace with yourself and saying, this is who I am, that is not a simple process. I think whenever you actually feel like you can take a risk, right? Because so many of us, we have that great idea. We're like, poop emoji, not like literally, but you get the point, right? Like you go through and you're like, I want to do something crazy. I want to do something that's going to affect the business. I want to have this big idea. But if you are not in an environment where you feel like you can take that risk, or if you're not in an environment where you feel like you were supported so that that idea can see the light of day, which is sort of the last version of this, is that these are the things where you feel like you can take a risk, where you can actually be supported in what that is, and that again, you are loving your job, you're not trying to keep your job. And this is what, like, I coach so many CEOs and so many leaders on how to just candidly shut up, right? Stop getting in the way. Stop thinking that leadership is telling everybody what to do. These are real problems, right? So how do we make this stuff happen? I think that there's a couple things we need to think about. One of the, for a long time I did this whenever I interviewed people on my team, is I'd ask them 2 simple questions. One would be, can you tell me how you have an idea? There's not a right answer to that question, but what I wanted to do is just to start to look at what is the level of self-awareness that people have of like, do I actually know what I need to do to be creative, or is it just sort of like a lottery and I'm hoping it's going to happen? The other part of it that I'd ask people was I said, can you tell me what you need to be happy? Because one of the things for me as a leader that I often realize is like, I cannot be responsible for my team's happiness. And if you're coming to me saying, look, tell me what you want my career to be or what it should be, that doesn't work. Right? Because I'm just going to, I don't know you. I'm not going to know you well enough. I'm going to guess, and more than likely, you're going to leave my team by the time I figure it out. But the thing that I see is every single week, I see resumes, I see portfolios, I see all these different expressions of people's work, where like the About Me section is blank. Or it's this sort of like corporate buzzword bingo of like a whole lot of words that just don't say anything, right? And that's the problem, is like, we're like, oh, we are where we worked, or we are the accounts we worked on, which is not true, right? People don't want to hire where you've been, they want to hire where you're going. And I think just taking the time and going through the process, and I don't have enough time to talk about this on this stage, right? But I think to just simply take the time to be honest with yourself and to spend the time to think about what do you want and need to be successful. Like for me, I went through this when I started my own studio. I'd made some radical statements, right? Like, what do I need? And what I started to think was like, for the first one, for me, I really need to live with problems. So I am limited myself to basically no more than 4 to 5 clients at any given time, period. Right? I don't want to scale my agency. I don't want to make it bigger. I actually think scale screws things up. I want to keep it small because I actually want to really live and work on these problems. I want to actually be engaged in the work. I'm tired of being a politician. I'm tired of being a therapist and a lawyer and an interventionist and all these other things. Like, this is the cruel part of this industry, is the longer you're in it, the more it takes you away from what you love. I need to stop that. Everybody who just chuckled, I'm with you. Again, circle of trust. Right? Like, I love working on diverse problems. Like, it was crazy for me. And whenever I went through this job search, it was the first time in my career I felt like my experience was a liability. Right? That I felt like so many companies just wanted somebody who was going to come in, shut up, and go along with whatever was going on. They didn't want somebody who was going to come in and say, you know what, that doesn't work, I'm going to be an advocate for my team. And so for me, like, I love for the fact that, like, I'm writing radio scripts and editing TV commercials, that I'm building websites and augmented reality experiences and art installations, and like, can do all that. And it's like, great, that's a super big asset. But too many companies are like, yeah, no, we like little boxes. Can you just do less? I think that for me, super simple thing, I actually want to work with people who respect me. Right? I'm tired. I fired a client recently because I said, I'm tired of getting hired as an expert and then having you not listen to me. Right? Like, I'm sick of it. And they came back and they're like, we'll give you more money. And I said, I don't care. Like, good work is not possible here. Right? Like, because they're like, well, what's our superpower? I'm like, you know what your superpower is? Like, it's rationalizing mediocrity. That's what your superpower is. Right? Like, you do all this really shitty work and then you sit around and throw yourself a parade about, like, but the data was great, but like, you didn't move the needle, you're still in the red. Like, no. But this is the thing, like, who I work with matters. I just want to do cool shit with cool people. Shouldn't be that hard, but here it is. But this was the toughest thing that I had to do, was that I need to take the time and be serious about prioritizing my creativity, my skills, my mental health, and my happiness, because I let that rot for way too long. But that is work, right? Like, saying what I do matter, like the fact that my skill actually, means something, that's a lot of work. And I think this is the thing, right, is what's on your list? Because whenever I've asked people, how do you have an idea? How are you happy? I've asked them things like that. I've had people that I mentor come back 2 and 3 days later and said, you know what, I have not been to sleep because I do not know the answer to these questions. And I think for too many of us, this is the problem, right? Is that we don't realize how delicate and emotional creativity can be. Like, I've actually started to study sports psychology a ton lately, because it's really similar that to be really creative, to be in a really good headspace, to be inspired is work. It's something you need to take care of and think about. It's an instrument that you need to actually be able to take care of. So your mental health is a huge part of your creativity. And if you're in a place where you're in a bad headspace, again, if you're doing or trying to keep your job, that is why it is such a struggle to feel like it has ideas. Like, it's crazy to me that, like, I fell back in love with design whenever I started my own studio. It was crazy how much of, like, a toxic experience I had because creating was just so much damn work. And the ability to actually understand that that's why this stuff really matters, that it isn't just, like some faucet you turn on. But again, I think, and I said this before, that it is understanding and truly thinking about how are you different and understanding that that is your superpower. Right? I've talked about that on this stage for years, is that we live in a society where you're made to feel that if you are different, if you think differently, if you look different, if you do any of these things, that is less than, that is a weakness, that is bullshit. And look, I got tattoos on both forearms as reminders to myself of this struggle. Right? So just because I'm like 3 feet up in the air does not mean I have this stuff figured out. Right? And don't get it twisted, right? Like, everybody who's going to be up here on this stage is susceptible to the same problems. So one of the things I would encourage you to do, this is one of my clients, we recently launched this is a startup that we created that is actually, we partner with 2 of the world's leading organizational and occupational psychologists to create an assessment that in 3 minutes will help you get a real good understanding of who you are. And a lot of what this is the tip of the iceberg of a much, much bigger project we are working on. But I think for so many people, understanding what you're good at, understand what makes you different, being able to actually make peace with that, get external validation so you feel like when you talk about it, you're not lying, is a really difficult thing. So I think that these sort of assessments, and again, this is a completely different way to look at that, and we're going to get into how do we connect you with employers and things like that, but the ability to actually go through and say, what am I good at? And that how do I actually believe it when I say it can be such a difficult thing. But I think the other part of it for me is like, look, no, you don't have to do this alone. You have an entire, like if you've heard the laughter, if you've seen the hands, if you've done all that, this is a community, and I think this is why I love How. This is why I come back every single year, is because, again, know that you cannot do this alone because remote work, too much with creativity, too much with this has robbed us of context, so we do not understand how we are doing against other people, and the other problem is it has robbed us of community. Right? Because for too many of us, we are not actually working with other people as much as we used to, so we aren't really sure. And the problem with creatives is whenever we are robbed of context and community, the imposter syndrome kicks in, and we immediately go to like, I'm not as good as everybody else, I'm not, right? Like we immediately go to the we are less than. And so what I would advise everybody here to do is to get three things. Get a mentor, get a coach, and get a sponsor. A mentor is somebody who you go to, just like what you said, for career advice. This is somebody you can say, you are where I want to be. If there is somebody here that you idolize, if there's somebody here that you think has really good advice, walk up to them, stick your hand out, introduce yourself, and say, look, I am looking for this sort of advice. Can you give me 15 minutes, half an hour? Can you do it on an ongoing basis? Are you open to this? But again, try to find somebody who can give you this sort of perspective. I think a coach, which is then somebody of how do you actually create the accountability and move through and make those goals happen. And then the last one is a sponsor, right? Think of this like the hype man, hype woman, cheerleader, something like that. But this is somebody who's going to help you with advocacy to remind you that you are awesome, because you all need that. And like you need somebody that's going to go through and say, hey, look, remember, this is why you're really good at these things. And I think you need somebody that can help you network and sort of, again, keep you seeing yourself in a different perspective. This should be your personal board of directors. But I think the one last thought I would leave you with, because a lot of this is like, this all sounds great. We took notes, whatever it is, right? Like, how do we start? Where do we go? Whenever I was going through my journey, right? Because I think there were definitely points. Like 2022 is probably one of the worst years of my life, right? Like there were days whenever I didn't understand why I couldn't get hired. I didn't understand why so many companies were ghosting me. I questioned every career decision I ever made. There's a woman, she spoke here before, named Sylvia Baffour, and Sylvia's like Yoda, right? Like she has this amazing ability to just like cut right to the heart of things. And it was about 3 or 4 months into my job search, and I said, Sylvia, I don't understand what's going on, right? Like I don't understand why this isn't working. I don't understand why I'm struggling so much. Like, honest to God, there were days I couldn't even get out of bed because I'm just like, I don't understand what the point of this is, right? Like my identity is so tied to my job. And she told me something that is one of those things that like, whenever you're starting on a transformation or you're starting on that journey, sounds so simple in the beginning, but as you think about it, it just keeps coming back to you and keeps coming back to you. And for those of you who don't know, this is Sylvia. She has an amazing book called I Dare You to Care. She has a podcast that, again, I would highly, highly encourage you to listen to. She's an expert on emotional intelligence. She was actually mentored for 14 years by Maya Angelou. She's somebody I'm so grateful to know. But what she said was, after I went through sort of complaining and talking about all this stuff, she just said, Steve, look, I need you to remember one simple thing. And it's the number one piece of advice I've given people for so long. She said, discomfort is the cost of fulfillment. And because what I had realized was that I was in a place in my career, and there's so many people that I talked to in the same place, I was more afraid of what I could lose than what I would gain. The taking the risk of going out on my own, the uncertainty of what that was, the uncertainty of like, hey, I could get all this stuff that I'm leaving. I was like, look, I need this certainty of like an in-house job. I can't take this risk. I can't, I've got so much, I don't want to lose this sort of stuff. And she said, look, Steve, like discomfort is a cost of fulfillment, right? Like the things that you say you want, the places that you want to go, the things that you want to be able to do are on the other side of that fear. And it was such a sobering moment for me, right? Because like when you've had a podcast for 7 years talking about all this stuff, it's like, holy crap, I'm a hypocrite. But that's the thing, right? Is I think that for so many of us, to find that place, to be able to take that risk, to be able to get to that place, and I think that's why like this phrase is one that I keep coming back to with, and the clicker maybe gave out. Like I've had this graphic before, right? Exist loudly. And I keep coming back to it because I think it has a different meaning, right? Like this is a time and a moment where I think for so many of us, for our happiness, for our mental health, for our teams, for the teams you lead, for the people you interact with, like for your spouse, your significant other, like whatever that is. To take that moment, right? To take this experience, to take this event as a moment to be able to take a pause, to reflect, to look at these things, to be able to go through and figure out what are the things that you need to do? What are the places that you want to go? And then how do you start to go back after this and create a plan, to be able to put that board of directors in place, to create the accountability to be able to get there, right? Because again, I still have such insane faith in what designers can do to influence society, to influence our companies, to remind everybody that they are creative. Just so many of us forgot. But it's a moment, again, to be able to take that time to invest in yourself in a moment whenever there's so much uncertainty and there's so much going on that maybe makes us doubt what we're doing. And so, yeah, I really think, so just for future reference, I think the clicker's dead. So look, we're all modern people now. We can all use a QR code. If you want to find out more about the show, if you want me to come to talk to your company, if you'd love to be able to work with us, if you'd just love to be able to say hi, right? This is a link to all of my information to be able to do that. Amy's going to ambush me here in a second. I'm not sure where she's coming from. But so my name's Steve Gates. That's my time. I'm going to be back to introduce Andy Vitale here in a second for another session, but thanks so much.
Being together is pure sweet honey.